There's something I've never shared before, something I've tried to bury, even from myself. You see, I was just like you. I didn't believe in ghosts, in spirits, in the afterlife. I told myself that strange noises were just the house settling, shadows on the wall were just tricks of the light. But then, one night, it happened to me. And once you've felt the presence of something you can't explain, something that defies everything you thought was real, you're never the same again. It started so small. A creak in the floorboards when no one was there. A faint knock on the window, but I live on the second floor. And then came the whispers, so faint at first, I thought they were in my head. Until one night, I heard my name, clear as day, spoken from the darkness. I know what you're thinking. It's just paranoia. Maybe even a dream. I told myself the same things, over and over. But the truth? The truth is far darker than I ever imagined. It wasn't just a voice. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something I couldn't escape, something that followed me. I don't share this to scare you. I share this because maybe you felt it too. That moment when the room grows cold. That unshakable feeling that you're not alone, even though no one is there. That sense that something is just waiting. You see, we all want to believe that death is the end, that what waits for us is peaceful. But what if it's not? What if the afterlife isn't quiet, but loud, clawing, and hungry? Tonight, I'm going to share 3 afterlife stories that will challenge everything you think you know about what happens after we die. These aren't just stories. They are warnings from those who've crossed over and somehow found their way back. But be warned, the afterlife is not always kind to those who speak of it. What would you do if the dead refused to stay silent? If the afterlife called your name, would you answer? What would you do if the afterlife wasn't the peace we were promised? What if it wasn't calm, or kind, or anything you ever imagined? What if it was something much darker? Something watching us, waiting for just the right moment to remind us it's there? Have you ever felt like you weren't alone? Like the air around you grew heavy, and you couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong? That someone, or something, was there with you, even if you couldn't see it? I know it sounds impossible, maybe even ridiculous. But think about it for a moment. Think about that time you heard a noise you couldn't explain, or felt a presence when you were home alone. You brushed it off, didn't you? Told yourself it was nothing. But what if it wasn't? What if it was something, reaching out from the other side? Tonight, we're diving into 3 terrifying afterlife stories. Stories that will make you question what's waiting for all of us beyond this life. And these aren't just tales meant to scare you. They're stories you'll feel. Stories you'll remember, the next time you wake up at 3 a.m. and the shadows in your room seem to move just a little too much. But before we begin, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A sound, a feeling, a glimpse of something you weren't meant to see? Share your story in the comments below. Maybe you're not the only one. Maybe you're not alone. Story 1, The Warning. This is the story of Clara, a young widow who moved into her late husband's family home to escape the pain of her loss. It was meant to be a place of solace, a quiet sanctuary where she could grieve and rebuild her life. But the house had other plans. At first, the house felt comforting, a connection to her husband, a place filled with his memories. She spent her days tending the garden, flipping through old photo albums, and trying to move on. But grief has a way of making you see things, doesn't it? Or maybe it wasn't grief at all. The first time it happened, she barely noticed it. 3 soft knocks at the front door. She dismissed it as the wind or perhaps a stray branch brushing against the house. After all, it was late, and her imagination was always more vivid at night. But the next night, it happened again. And the next. Always at the same time, 3:15 a.m. Always 3 knocks. She checked the front porch every morning, but there were no footprints, no signs of anyone, or anything. Still, she told herself it was nothing, a coincidence. Until the night it grew louder. The knocks were no longer soft taps. They were deliberate, forceful. Clara's heart pounded as she stared at the door, too afraid to move. And then, just as suddenly as they began, they stopped. But the silence didn't bring her peace. It brought something else. In the attic, she found her husband's old journal. It was filled with musings about the house, its history, and strange occurrences he'd never shared with her. But it was the final page that made her blood run cold. She felt a chill run down her spine as she read those words. Had her husband known about this? Had he experienced the same thing before his death? And why hadn't he told her? The knocks returned, more insistent, more demanding. Clara's breath quickened as she clutched the journal, her husband's warning echoing in her mind. But it wasn't just the knocks this time. There was a voice. Voice, distorted but familiar. Clara, open the door. It's me. It sounded exactly like him. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. The voice was too smooth, too calculated. And then, the temperature plummeted. Clara's breath came out in visible puffs as the walls seemed to close in around her. The knocking turned to pounding, the voice grew louder, more desperate, and the shadows, they weren't shadows anymore. They were shapes. Figures. When Clara woke up, the house was silent. The journal lay on the floor, the rest of its pages charred and blackened. But the warning, her husband's last words, remained untouched. She left the house that day and never returned. And yet, no one has lived there since. Some say Clara's story was a hallucination caused by grief. But if that's true, why does no one dare stay in the house past 3:15 a.m.? Clara's warning was chilling, but what if someone actually crossed into the afterlife and brought something back with them? Our next story is about a man who did just that, and what followed him will haunt you forever. Story 2, The Near-Death Nightmare. Hospitals are often thought of as places of healing, where lives are saved and miracles happen. But for Ethan, they became the threshold between life and something far more sinister. I wasn't supposed to come back. Ethan's story begins like many others, a routine surgery, nothing out of the ordinary. But what happened during those few minutes when his heart stopped would haunt him for the rest of his life, however short that life would be. Ethan's heart stopped during surgery. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, he was clinically dead. What he experienced in those 3 minutes would forever alter his perception of reality and his sanity. At first, it was peaceful, a light at the end of a tunnel, warm and inviting. But just as Ethan reached for it, everything changed. Ethan was yanked into a void, a cold, infinite space filled with whispers that spoke in languages he couldn't understand. The darkness felt alive, pressing against him, suffocating him. You weren't supposed to come here, yet. Before he could ask what it meant, the figure reached for him, its icy grip burning his skin. And then, with a jolt, Ethan woke up. He was alive, but something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd brought something back with him, something that didn't belong in this world. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. But then it moved. Every night, the figure returned. It never spoke, but its presence grew heavier, its whispers louder. Ethan knew it wasn't just a nightmare. He had brought something back from the void. Ethan turned to the only person he thought could help, a psychic named Margot, known for her connection to the spirit world. But even Margot wasn't prepared for what she saw. Margot, whispering. You brought back a piece of the void. It's attached to you now, feeding on your fear. It won't stop until it takes you back. Margot explained that the void wasn't just a place, it was a force, a realm of lost souls and unspeakable horrors. By crossing into it, even briefly, Ethan had opened a door that couldn't be closed. The time is near, you can't escape. The whispers turned to screams as the figure lunged at Ethan. He woke up covered in scratches, the talisman shattered on the floor. He knew his time was running out. It finally came for me. Don't try to find me. Ethan disappeared that night, leaving nothing behind but the note. His apartment was found locked from the inside, and to this day, no one knows what happened to him. But those who have stayed in his apartment since report hearing whispers at 3:17 a.m. Ethan's story is a grim reminder that some doors should never be opened. But what happens when the afterlife doesn't just haunt you, it comes to claim you? Our next story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the world beyond. Story 3: The Silent Witness. In the shadow of forgotten history, there are places the living dare not tread. This church, abandoned for centuries, holds secrets too terrifying to uncover. Marta didn't believe in the stories, until she became one of them. In 1643, 6 priests disappeared without a trace from St. Cyril's church. Locals claimed the church was cursed, that the priests had been taken by something that lived beneath the altar. But no bodies were ever found. Marta thought she was chasing a forgotten legend. She never expected to uncover the truth, because some truths aren't meant to be known. St. Cyril's church was as eerie as the stories suggested. The air was thick, the silence oppressive, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Beneath the church, Marta found a hidden basement, a place untouched for centuries. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of damp stone was overwhelming. But it wasn't the cold that made her shiver, it was the symbols carved into the walls. The walls were covered in markings, desperate warnings, prayers, or perhaps something far darker. And then she found the letter. They come through the cracks in the veil, they demand sacrifice. Do not listen to their voices. Do not answer their call. It was written by Father Gregor, the last known priest of St. Cyril's. His words sent chills down Marta's spine, but she dismissed them as the ramblings of a frightened man. She should have listened. Marta stayed through the night, determined to record any unusual activity. At first, there was only silence. But as the clock struck midnight, the air grew heavy, and faint chanting began to echo through the basement. The voices weren't coming from above or outside, they were coming from the walls. And then, she saw it. The mass wasn't just light, it was alive. Dozens of faces appeared and disappeared within it, their mouths moving as if screaming, though no sound came. And then, in a chorus of whispers, they spoke to her. "Come closer, we've been waiting." Marta tried to resist, but the voices were too powerful. They weren't just calling her, they were pulling her. She felt her body moving toward the mass against her will. "I saw the afterlife, it isn't heaven. It's a hunger. A darkness that feeds on fear and despair. It's waiting for us all." Marta was never seen again. Her journal was found outside the church, along with her broken camera. And though the church remains abandoned, some say they still hear voices coming from the basement, calling for the next witness. These stories remind us that the afterlife may not be the peaceful haven we hope for. What if it's something far darker, something that watches, waits, and hungers? So, what will you do when the afterlife knocks at your door? If these stories left you questioning what lies beyond, subscribe for more chilling tales every week. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that might just be true. 3 stories, 3 warnings, 3 glimpses into the afterlife that none of us were ever meant to see. Now the question remains, which one will haunt you tonight? Which story chilled you the most? Was it Clara's haunting warning, Ethan's deadly encounter with the void, or Marta's horrifying discovery beneath the church? Let me know in the comments below, if you can bear to relive them. If you've ever experienced something unexplainable, a voice, a shadow, a presence, share your story. Who knows? It might even become part of our next video. If these stories left you questioning what's waiting for us on the other side, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps keep the darkness at bay, or maybe it's what draws it closer. And don't miss our next episode, where we uncover cursed objects that ruin lives. A doll that moves on its own, a painting that brings misfortune, and a mirror that reflects something you'll wish you'd never seen. You won't want to miss it. Good night, and remember, when the afterlife calls, don't answer the door.